Our dear friend in London, Brendan O'Neill. Welcome to Outsiders, Brendan.
Hi, guys.
How are you over there in the mad world of Brexit? Take it away, Brendan.
Oh, it's not going particularly well at the moment. I mean, Boris got a deal, which lots of people didn't think he would get a deal. He got a deal, the EU agreed to it, and he's agreed to it, and he's put it before Parliament. But, you know, the problem in this country is very, very, very straightforward. If you hear people saying that Brexit is super complicated and very difficult and no one knows how to work it out, that's not true. It's really simple. The crisis in this country springs from the fact that the people want one thing and the political class want another. I mean, it is that straightforward. The people, 17.4 million of them, and I am very proudly one of those 17.4 million, we want to leave the European Union. And the political establishment, more than 70% of MPs, more than 70% of the business class, 90% of academics, they want to stay in the European Union. And every single crisis and tension and conflict and argument in the UK springs from this fundamental divide. So Boris got this deal. It's, in my view, it's not a very good deal, but it's a deal which people didn't think he would get. But it's been blocked because the establishment, more broadly, doesn't want any kind of Brexit at all.
Talking about the establishment, tell us about this poisonous little quisling, the Speaker Bercow and the role he's played.
Oh, John Bercow. So John Bercow is the Speaker of the House of Commons. He's supposed to be this neutral figure who oversees everyday business in the Commons. He's supposed to be this person who takes a step back from the heated political nature of the House of Commons and just manages things and chairs things and makes sure that business goes through. But actually, he has taken the side of Remain. I mean, it is so blatantly obvious to anyone who is honest to themselves or anyone who has two brain cells to rub together. John Bercow is on the side of Remain, and he has frustrated the Brexit process in Parliament again and again and again. And let's not forget that this is a man whose wife had a sticker on her car saying bollocks to Brexit. And this is someone he comes, I don't know if I can say that word this time in Australian TV, but he comes from a world in which that's the sentiment that people hold. So he has, he's really used parliamentary procedure and he's mismanaged parliamentary procedure in order to hold up very important votes on Brexit, in order to shrink the space for discussion about Brexit and in order to frustrate the flow of Brexit through Parliament.
Brendan, we've got a little clip we'll just play so our viewers can get a taste of this character Bercow. So we'll just quickly play John Bercow, the Speaker, independent so-called, of British Parliament.
I couldn't care less whether you like it or not. It is. I don't require any assistance from you, Mr. Stevenson. You wouldn't have the foggiest idea where to start in seeking to counsel me on this important. I require no response from you. I require no response from you, young man. I require no response from you, young man. I require no response from you. Get out, man. You will not be missed.
So you get a flavour of him there, Brendan. So this is the establishment, full-throated, just turning its back on the members of Parliament, correct?
That's completely correct. And, you know, his voice drives me mad. So listening to that clip has driven me slightly over the edge. But he has that, lots of people in the UK, lots of ordinary people look at the likes of Bercow and they think to themselves, that's the establishment. And, you know, this is actually, it's on one level, it's really funny and ridiculous and perverse. But on another level, it's actually quite tragic because with the EU referendum in 2016, we were told this was the first opportunity that ordinary British people have ever had, really, to not only select a party who would govern the country, but to potentially change the whole nature of governance, to change the way in which the country was run, to break away from the European Union so that we could have lawmaking done in a democratic fashion rather than in a technocratic fashion. And we voted in our millions for that change, for a radical change, for a positive change. And the establishment has turned around and said to us, you can't have it. Tough luck.
James?
We disagree with you and therefore we will frustrate it. It's so sad.
So, Brendan, what comes next? The polls I've seen suggest that the pro-Brexit side is hardening, and yet the political class seems to be more and more pushing the idea that Brexit is dead and they're going to make them go to another vote or do something to stop and keep an election from happening to stop that from occurring. If Brexit dies, and 52% of Britons want that to happen, they want it to live, what happens next? What happens to British society? What happens to the parliamentary system? Is Britain then an ungovernable country because the political class has rebelled against its masters, the people?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and I think what you're suggesting is absolutely right, because if Brexit doesn't happen, then in my view, the United Kingdom is not a democratic country. Now, I know that sounds very dramatic, and some people say it's melodramatic, but it's absolutely true. This would be the first time in the history of the franchise. Every person in this country has had the right to vote since about 1928, 1929, so it's less than 100 years. It would be the first time in the history of the franchise that we voted for something and it didn't happen. And, you know, the whole nature of democracy only works on the principle of losers' consent. If the people who lose the vote consent to the vote going through. That is such a fundamental aspect of democratic life. There are so many votes in this country over the past few years that I've disagreed with profoundly, but I consent to them. Even though I'm the loser, I consent because I recognise that democracy is far more important than my feelings. What we have at the moment is the withdrawal of losers' consent, and we have these millions of largely middle-class, upper-middle-class people and members of the establishment who are refusing to give their consent to the majoritarian vote. And in those kind of circumstances, democracy itself stops working.
But Brendan, we've seen in recent months protests continuously in Paris and throughout France. We're at the moment seeing them in Barcelona. And yet the British people in their hundreds of thousands aren't taking to the streets and saying, respect our vote, respect democracy. Why are the British so submissive in a way when the elite are doing everything they can to frustrate their will from being implemented?
I think that's a really good question, and I've said this before. I've said that the most shocking thing in Western Europe at the moment is not that French people are rioting, it's that the British people are not rioting. Yeah. It's that British people haven't taken to the streets in huge numbers and said, listen, we voted for something and you have to give it to us. Now, I'm not arguing for riots, but what I am arguing for is a form of protest, because the thing is, if the democratic avenue is closed off to us, if we go through all the democratic process as we should, and if we vote in a peaceful way and in a legal way and in a legitimate way, and we still don't get the thing that we want, that does raise the incredibly profound question of how we get it. How do we get this break from the European Union that the majority of people want in this country? And they want it because they believe that democracy should be done within this country rather than by experts overseas. So I think that the establishment doesn't quite realise the buttons it is currently pressing. And it doesn't realise that if it goes further and further down this route of frustrating the democratic will, it is opening a Pandora's box and it is inflaming tensions in this country.
Now, Nigel Farage, so he's regularly been on our show, as you know. Nigel was very unimpressed with this Brexit deal. So let's just say this Brexit deal does get through one way or another and it goes to a general election. The polls yesterday showed that a majority of Brits are unimpressed by the deal. So are we likely to see a situation, Brendan, where Boris literally emulates his hero Winston Churchill in that he gets his Brexit through but then loses the subsequent election, where the Brits say, well, thank you very much, but that wasn't good enough, we're now turning to Nigel Farage. Is that a likely or plausible scenario?
I mean, everything's plausible in Britain at the moment. Things are in such a state of flux. It's such a confusing and exciting, in my view, political period in this country. But I think I agree with Nigel about Boris's deal. I don't think it's a very good deal. And anyone who's read it, and I have read most of it, it's very long, you realise that it's actually not that different to Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, which keeps us beholden to certain European Union rules and European Court of Justice jurisdiction. It would create a vassal state situation. So lots of people are uncomfortable with the deal. But the thing that Boris has going in his favour at the moment is that the more that Parliament pushes back against him, the more that the parliamentary establishment says, we're not going to let you have any kind of Brexit, even your soft Brexit, the more he's winning favour among the public. Because the key emotion felt by lots of voters in this country at the moment, they are incredibly annoyed by Parliament. They are really irritated that we voted for this Parliament in 2017. 80% of the MPs in Parliament were voted in on the basis that they would respect the result of the 2016 referendum. They're now reneging on that. They're backtracking on that. So people want to clear Parliament out. So the more that Boris goes into conflict with Parliament, the more it benefits him in the long run. So as to what will happen in an election, that remains unpredictable.
Now, just very quickly before we go, Brendan, you've had the same idiots, Extinction Rebellion, wandering around, gluing themselves to Trafalgar Square and elsewhere, top of buses and aeroplanes. Are they still around the streets of London? What's been happening?
No, we've cleared them off the streets. It's absolutely fantastic. The people of London have rebelled against Extinction Rebellion. You know, we had this extraordinary situation where these posh, deranged hippies were occupying the streets for 2 weeks. They were doing yoga on Westminster Bridge. They were dancing like lunatics in Trafalgar Square. The police refused to clear them off the streets. Then they occupied the tube trains, and ordinary people went nuts. They threw them out, they got rid of them, they used direct action against them. So the people have done what the establishment and the police refused to do, and they've got rid of these idiots from our streets. I think it's a really positive rebellion against eco-elitism, and I celebrate it.
Fantastic. Brendan O'Neill, always great to have you on Outsiders. Thanks so much for being there at midnight tonight in London, and we'll speak to you soon. Thanks so much, mate.